Hey guys, my name is Marta, welcome to my channel and welcome to my first official Victober 2022 video without counting my TBR video. Today, as I promised on my TBR video, I am going to be sharing with you every single Victorian classic I own. Most of the books I own are novels, but I do also own a few plays and a few poetry collections. I will be showing you all of that. I will also be talking a bit about some of the books, which ones I have read and loved and which ones I am very excited to get to hopefully this October. I guess that's all for my introduction. And now, without further ado, let's get to all of the Victorian classics that I own. Starting with the old Penguin popular classic book collections, I have two Victorian classics. And one of them is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth, which is a Victorian children's classic about these humanized animals. I don't know anything else about it but I know that lots of people have it as a childhood favorite novel, so I am excited to read it if I have time this Victober, or if not, in the next few months, since I had my eyes on it for a while now but still haven't got it to it. And the other Victorian novel that I own in this collection is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I have read this, and to be honest, it was not my favorite Dickens. I, from the very beginning, knew I wasn't going to love it because I have never been a huge fan of the story, and I remember watching the film adaptation when I was a child and not really vibing with it. But still, it's a fun Dickens. I guess that if you are getting into the author and you are still young, it might be a good starting point, but sadly the story was just not for my particular taste. Now moving on to the Penguin Black Spines, I have three books by the Brontes. The first one is Anne Bronte's Agnes Grey. This is a classic that I read this year and that I made a review of, so I will link that down below. It tells the story of Agnes Grey, a governess, and it's a very short story that I really enjoyed. It's fun, it's fast-paced, and it's very different from Tenant of Wentworth Hall, the other novel by Anne Bronte. I personally liked it, but I do prefer Anne Bronte's other novel. But it was enjoyable, and I guess that if you are just getting into the Brontes, this might be easier to read since it's way shorter. Next, I have Villette and the Professor, both by Charlotte Bronte. I haven't read any of these, but I am very excited to hopefully read Villette in the near future. Some people consider it their favorite Charlotte Bronte book. Contrary to most of the Bronte stories, it takes place in Brussels, so not in the UK. It looks like a story that I am really going to enjoy, and I am very excited to read it hopefully very soon. When it comes to the Professor, I don't know much about it. I just know that it's about a professor. I've heard that this one is not Charlotte Bronte's best novel, so I guess I will not get to it as soon as I plan to get to Villette. Next, I have some more Dickens. First, I have A Tale of Two Cities. This one I read 2 years ago, but sadly I don't remember much about it, so I'm hoping to reread it soon. It was pretty interesting to read when I read it, but I would like to give it a reread to fully get the stories, since I think that when I read it I wasn't in the mood for this type of story. Next, I also have Barnaby Roots by Dickens, which I have read but sadly didn't like so much. I did like the first few pages, but I just thought that Dickens made the story be way longer than it should have. The story is some sort of murder mystery, and it has this shocking crow, which I think is the best part of the entire book. And last Dickens I have as a Penguin Black Spine is The Old Curiosity Shop. I haven't read this, but I know that it's the story of a young girl, and that, as most of the earlier Dickens, it's a picaresque novel. I will hopefully get to it soon, since it's one that I feel pretty drawn by. I don't know why, but I do. So I hope I can get to it soon, and I hope I do love it. Next, I have one George Eliot, and it is The Mill on the Floss. I haven't read any George Eliot. I did have this one on my summer TBR, but I never got to it. I hope I can read it soon, since this plot does sound really appealing to me. This one is supposed to be George Eliot most autobiographical story, and it's also one of her most popular ones. So I hope I can get to it soon, and I hope I do love it. Next, I have some plays by Bernard Shaw. I have Pygmalion, which I read and analyzed for uni. This is the story of a young girl named Eliza who's found by this phonetician who agrees with a friend of his to change her way of speaking in order for her to become a proper lady. It's a very funny play with a lot of social commentary, and it's a great starting point if you want to get into Shaw's plays. So I do really recommend it. And the other show I have is Plays Unpleasant. This is a collection of some of his plays, and it is from this collection that I am going to be reading Mrs. Warren's Profession for Victober. So I am very excited to get into that one, and I hope I do love it as much as I have loved the other plays by him that I have read. And last, Penguin Black Spine, and it's one that I also plan on reading for Victober, and it is Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales. This is a collection of horror stories. I've tried to read this many times during many Victobers, but I have never made it to more than the first story, but this year I am committed to it. I know that I enjoy Gaskell's writing style, it's just that sometimes I struggle with short stories and that I always have a lot to do in October, but this year this book is a priority and I won't let the month go by without me finally getting to it. Next, I have one Dickens, a Wordsworth edition, and it is Nicholas Nickleby. This is a Dickens that I enjoyed but did not love. I did like the overall, but as I have just said, as most of the earlier Dickens, it just felt too long. I did really enjoy getting to know how the Victorian society worked. I think I got quite a good grasp of that from this book. But overall, it was not a favorite, but at least I know that it's a book that I got something from. Next, I'm going to show you the 3 novels that I have as a vintage classics. I think this is how this collection is called, but anyway, they are the 3 main Bronte novels. So, The Tenant of Wilfred Hall by Bronte, a book I read back in 2019, really loved. It's the story of this mysterious woman who arrives at Wilfred Hall, and our main character and narrator tries to figure out the story of. It's a very sad book, it's very slow, it's very autumnal, and it's one that I really recommend if you are getting into Victorian fiction. Next, I have the Victorian Gothic that lots of people love and adore, and it is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. This is many people's favorite book. I read it in 2018 and really enjoyed it, but I sadly do not feel the same attachment to it as most people do feel. I am hoping to reread it, not this year, but hopefully in the near future, just to see if anything has changed. But anyway, it's a very devastating story filled with very complex and morally questionable characters. It has this gothic, ghostly vibe to it, and it's a book that many people enjoy, so another good starting point for Victorian fiction. Actually, all of the Bronte's novels are, I'm not gonna lie, so I am just going to stop saying that. But despite that, I do have to say that this one is the best starting point if you want to get into Victorian fiction, and it is Jenner by Charlotte Bronte. I read this, I don't know when, 2018 probably, I think right after reading Wuthering Heights. This was an instant favorite of mine. It tells the story of Jenner from her childhood to her becoming a proper woman after suffering a lot being a governess. It's a story I really connected to. Jenner was a character that I felt very identified with when I first read it. It's a book that has a lot to love about. It's a book that has a very strong main character that you can help but feel for, and it's just perfect. It also has this gothic, mysterious atmosphere, and I just love it. I am very excited to be rereading it later this year for uni and to find out if it's still my favorite classic, because when I talk about my favorite classics, I always talk about this one. So I guess later on in the year I will find out if Jenner is still an all-time favorite of mine or if it has been replaced by any other novel. And now that I am on that shelf, I am also going to show you the 3 Penguin Deluxe Victorian books I own. The first one is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I am not going to talk much about it because I do not like Dracula. It was one of the first classics I ever read, and even though at the time I did enjoy it, I think that if I read it now I wouldn't. It was a good starting point for me when it comes to reading classics, since at the very beginning I was very drawn to the entire gothic atmosphere. But right now, when I think about the story, I just don't want to reread it. So yeah, Dracula. It's not a personal favorite of mine, but I guess that if you are into vampire stories, it's a book that you must read. Next I have the children's classic, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. This is a very weird Victorian novel by Lewis Carroll. I don't think I have said the author's name, but anyway, everyone knows that. It's a very weird, twisted story that's not exactly for children. It's very symbolic, it's very weird overall, but at the same time it's very fun and twisted. But yeah, anyway, really recommend it, really like Alice, and as I think everyone does, to be honest. Next I have one that I don't know whether it's Victorian or not, and it is Sherlock Holmes novels by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I am not quite sure which ones are Victorian and which not, so I am just going to leave it like that. I haven't ever read any Sherlock story, even though I know I should, but anyway, I'm just going to briefly mention it since I am not quite sure whether these are exactly Victorian or not. Next I have this very heavy box of the entirety of Oscar Wilde's published things, so his poems, his plays, his non-fiction writings / essays, and his novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde is an author I love, it's an author everyone loves, and this is very heavy, so I'm just not going to show it for a long time. But anyway, read Oscar Wilde, he's fantastic, and I am very excited to announce that I'm going to be rereading The Picture of Dorian Gray soon, not for Victober, probably in November, and I have a pretty fun video planned about it. So yeah, Oscar Wilde, love him, read him please. My camera just died, so I'm so sorry if anything has changed, but anyways, we are now going to get into my Penguin English library, Victorian Classics. First I have some Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White. I haven't read this, I am excited to do so, since it does sound like it's a fun read. I've only read one Wilkie Collins that I will talk about later, and I did not quite like it, so I am a bit hesitant about what I want to read next by him. But despite that, The Woman in White is most people's favorite Wilkie Collins, so I hope I like it. And yeah, it's a horror story, I guess. It's a sensation novel, so I guess full of action, full of movement, and not really boring at all. But I'm still hesitant about it since I did not like the only Collins I read, as I have just said. Next I have another edition of A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. I am not going to talk about it since I have already discussed it before, but I did read from this edition when I first read it. So here you have that. Next we have some George Eliot. I have her most well-known novel, Middlemarch, which is this huge story of this provincial town. It's filled with characters whose lives get intertwined. It's a must-read for Victorian fiction novels, and it's a book that I am very excited to one day get to, but that's at the same time very intimidating, so I don't think I will get to it this Victober, but hopefully I will do so next year. And the other Eliot I have is Silas Marner. This is, I think, one of her shortest works. It's about Silas Marner, an old man who lives isolated and that most of the community doesn't really like. It's a very short story that lots of people claim it's a good starting point if you want to get to George Eliot. I did try to read it last year for Victober, but I wasn't in the mood for it, so I put it down. But hopefully this year it will be the time for me to finally read it and to then finally read some George Eliot. Next I have two novels by the one and only Elizabeth Gaskell, North and South, which I read a long time ago and really loved. Is the story of this woman who moves to the north of England and who finds out how that place is completely different to the one she previously lived in. She gets involved with all this industrial workers movement who do not live the happiest life. It's a fantastic book. It has social criticism, it has a love story, and it's just very readable. I love Elizabeth Gaskell for her writing style. I love how readable she is and how she makes me not want to put down her novels. So yeah, adored it, really recommend it if you like Victorian fiction. And the other Gaskell is my current read. It's a book that I am reading for Victober, even though I did start a bit earlier, and it is Wives and Daughters. I was gifted this for my birthday by my family, and I was very intimidated by this size, but after I picked it up 2 days ago, I remembered how much I loved Elizabeth Gaskell's writing style, and I have already devoured 200 pages of it. It's the story of this young girl whose father gets married to another woman. It's a story of love affairs, of family, it has some drama, it has some gossiping. It's fantastic. I am adoring it, and I am loving how it makes me want to keep on reading every time I have to put it down. Next I have 3 really short books by 3 different authors. The first one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is a gothic story, mysterious short novel / novella about this man who has some questionable psychological issues and personality problems. It's a very twisted story that most people know about. That's why I gave that very ambiguous synopsis of. I sadly did not love it as much as I expected to, but it's a good one if you like science fiction, if you like the gothic, and it's good to read if you like Frankenstein because it has the same mad scientist vibes that Frankenstein has. And next I have The Island of Dr. Muro by H.G. Wells. I haven't read any H.G. Wells because I don't really vibe with sci-fi, but I do own this one. I think this one is about this mysterious island. I don't actually really know. It's short, I might get to it this Victober if I feel like it, but at this moment it's just not really calling my attention. Lastly, I have the last Victorian novel I read before Victober started, and it is The Warden by Anthony Trollope. This is the first Trollope in his Barsetshire series. It's a very short book with a lot of social criticism about the church, and it's set in a small town. It has those small town vibes. I've talked about it in more detail in my classics I read this summer video, so I will link that down below, but I did really enjoy it. I really vibed with Trollope's writing style. I really liked his humor, so I am hoping to read more Trollope really soon, even though I do not own any other of his works. Now we are getting into my Oxford Classic editions. First Oxford Classics I have here to show you is The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Bradon. I haven't read any of Elizabeth Bradon's novels. She is mostly known by her sensational ones, but I do not own Lady Audley's Secret nor any other of those, but I do own this one, and I was going to read it this summer since it's some sort of retelling, rewriting of Madame Bovary. But after I read Madame Bovary, I wasn't in the mood for more of that since I did not really like it, so I never got to it. I will one day read it because I own it, but I think that when I want to get to Bradon as an author, I will have to buy any other of her works because this one doesn't look like one I want to prioritize. Next I have another of the Bronte's novels, and it is Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. This is a historical novel apparently, and I did not know that. I honestly knew nothing about it, but the fact that either you like it or you hate it. I haven't heard anyone say that they just enjoyed it. So yeah, I think I will have to figure out whether it bores me to hell or whether I fall in love with it once I read it. Next I have another Wilkie Collins, Armadale. This is the Wilkie Collins novel that sounds the most appealing to me, and I do really want to read it this Victober if I have the time. It's about this mysterious lady who's very murderous, I think. It sounds dark, it sounds creepy, it sounds like it's going to include a very interesting psychological portrayal of this woman. So I am very excited to read it, and I hope I love it as much as I expect to. And hopefully if I do read it for Victober, I will also blog my experience reading it. For Dickens here, Hard Times, I have to read this for uni. This is one of Dickens' most well-known works, and I honestly don't know anything about it. I do know that lots of people love it. I do know that as most of Dickens' works, it's going to have a social commentary as well as some good humor. So I am very excited for that. I am actually going to read this soon, since I have to read it for uni. So we'll see whether I like it or not. I am very excited to get to it, since everything that I read by him was for the Dickens versus Tolstoy, and it was his earliest works. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what Hard Times is all about. Next I have another edition of Middlemarch, not going to discuss it again. Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is Elizabeth Gaskell's first novel, and it's one that lots of people are reading for Victober because it does include a disabled main character. It's one that I got because I was going to take part in a buddy read of it, but I did not have the time to do so. As North and South, I think it takes place in an industrial town, and I think it also deals with similar themes to that one. So from that information, I expect to really like it when I read it. And I guess that if I am still in the mood for some Victorian fiction and for some Elizabeth Gaskell after Victober, it might be one of my next Victorian reads. And last two Oxford classics are two hardies, so Tess of the Dubervilles, which I read this summer but sadly did not vibe with. This classic tells the story of Tess, who, with the purpose of restoring her family's fortune, starts to work with some men that make very questionable things and that make her life some sort of nightmare. It's a very sad book, very hard to read, very atmospherical and very symbolic. It's a book that is going to destroy you, but it's sadly a book that I did not really vibe with. I think I wasn't in the mood for it because when I think about the plot, it does sound like something that I would adore, that I would be very intrigued by. So I guess I will find out whether it's me and Hardy who don't get along, or whether I just wasn't in the mood when I read The Mayor of Kestervich, which is the last Oxford Victorian classic I own. And this I don't know much about, but the fact that it's about a man who is trying to redeem his past. This is the group read for Victober, so I am going to read it for that, even though after reading Tess and feeling like I don't really vibe with Hardy's writing style, this is not the book that I am the most excited to get to. Next I have three small Penguin Macmillans, they are The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I have already talked about, so I am not really going to dive back into it again. And the other Victorian classic that I own in this edition, since I just find out that one of the ones that I thought was Victorian isn't, is The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. This is Dickens' first full novel. It tells the story of Mr. Pickwick. It's basically a tale of his adventures. It's a very fun book that might drag at some moments, but that overall makes for a fun reading experience. When I was reading it, I did not have the best time, but I do like looking back at my experience. I think I have many good memories attached to me reading it. Overall, a book that it's good to remember, but that's not the best book to read, especially if you are rushing through it, since it does feel a bit repetitive at some moments. And after talking about it a few times, I now have the only vintage Victorian classic to show you, and it is The Haunted Hotel by Wilkie Collins. This is the famous Wilkie Collins novel I read and didn't love. It's a mystery about this hotel where this mysterious dark event took place. I did really enjoy the first 100 pages, but after that the story started to drag a lot. So not a favorite of mine, and not one I recommend as a starting point for Wilkie Collins, because I have already said it now makes me hesitate on whether I want to read him or not. Next I have some plays and poetry collections. Starting with the poetry collections, I have Emily Bronte's The Night is Darkening Around Me. Not much to say, but the fact that I have tried to read it multiple times and just don't vibe with. And it's short, so that says a lot. I did think I would love it, but I am not the biggest poetry fan, so I guess her poetry is just not for me. However, on the complete opposite side, I own Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese and other poems. I did read this and adored it. I love Barrett Browning's poetry writing, and I just love her as a person. I love it and I really enjoyed it. So that makes her one of the very few poets that I think that I can say that I love and that do not get tired of reading. And next I have two play collections that I am expecting to make videos about. One of them is Henry Arthur Jones' plays. This collection includes 3 of his most popular plays, and the other one is A.J. Byron's. I am hoping to make a video on this one and another one on this one, and it's going to be all about reading some Victorian drama and getting to know how it was, since most of people only really think about Wilde and Shaw when they think about Victorian theatre. So I am excited to see what these two authors wrote about. And speaking of poetry, I completely forgot that I also had this Christina Rossetti collection that I am reading for Victober, and Aurora Lee by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which I am also reading for Victober and I am very excited by. And speaking of collection, this one is a short story collection, but it is A Belager City and Other Tales of the Seen and the Unseen by Margaret Oliphant. I am also reading this for Victober, or at least I hope I can get to it. I have never read anything by this author, but these are dark tales, and they are supposed to be very dark and creepy, so very excited to see what they are all about. If I am not forgetting anything, I have a few Broadview editions. These are some of my favorite editions to buy when it comes to classics, since they include a lot of additional material. I am going to start with the one that's on my Victober TBR and the one that I have already started, even though I have only read a chapter of, and it is Life in the Sick Room by Harriet Martineau. This is non-fiction. In this book, Harriet Martineau talks about experience with illness and tries to raise awareness on the life of a disabled person. Next I have Half Case by Dina Mullock-Craig. I haven't read anything by this author, but I have heard a lot of good things about her, so I am hoping to get to this very short book of hers this Victober. It tells the story of a mixed woman who's the daughter of an English merchant and an Indian princess. I think this is some sort of Billus roman, so I am very excited to see what the story is all about. I have never read any fiction by a mixed author from the Victorian era, so I am very excited to read this. I was just talking about poetry, but here I have another poetry collection. This is a collection of Michael Field's poems. This is an author who was actually two authors, and yeah, this is poetry. Don't know when I'm going to read it, since I am not a big poetry fan, but yeah, another one for the Broadview Editions collection. Next I have The Beetle by Richard Marsh. This is some sort of gothic story, good for fans of Dracula, I have heard. It's creepy, it's mysterious. I am hoping to read this, if I have the time for, this October, since it's spooky, but I am not prioritizing it, so we'll see whether I get to it or not. Next I have The Romance of a Shop by Amy Levy. This is a Victorian novel about these sisters who establish their own business. It sounds like a very sweet story. and like something that I could potentially really love. So this one is going to be one of my priorities outside of my TBR. And yeah, I cannot wait to read it. It's going to be my first Amy Levy, and I hope I love it as much as I expect to. And last, I have A City Girl by Margaret Harness. This is a very short story about a woman who has been abandoned with a child. It does sound devastating, and it also sounds like it's going to be a harsh read, but I am still excited to see the story this book has to tell. And actually last, I have a book that I almost forgot about, and it is Carmilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This is the famous vampire story about a female vampire, a book that I have never read but that I am very ashamed of not having read, so I am hoping to remedy that this Victober. But yeah, not much else to say but that. Very excited to hopefully read it this year. So that was all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't very long. Comment down below if you've read any of the books I just showed you and which ones you want me to prioritize for the ones that I haven't read. Also comment down below any Victorian poetry authors that you think I might enjoy if I like Elizabeth Barrett Browning, because I do want to try some poetry, even though I know that it's not my favorite literary genre. Also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I hope your day's gone amazing, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!